Wait, someone
Good afternoon. I'm Cecil Goodman. I'm a faculty here in Adventure Education. And I, along with my undergraduate faculty colleagues, are so honored to celebrate these outstanding senior projects presented today. As we begin, I want to offer an acknowledgement that we come together on the ancestral land and unceded territory of the Yavapai and Apache peoples. And in doing so, we acknowledge also the histories of violent colonialism as well as lineages of indigenous resistance to that violence that has shaped this place and so much of this world. And I just am offering a small gesture in words of gratitude for indigenous care and stewardship of this land that began long before there was a place called Prescott and continues today. So thank you. And then another thing that I think is important in this particular moment as a faculty at a liberal arts school, which is committed to and aspires to embody social and environmental justice, to share a statement of solidarity with so many brave students and faculty on campuses across the US, and to echo their insistence on academic freedom and the urgent calls for an end to the terrible war and genocide in Gaza. And so just wanted to offer that too. And we're lucky here at Prescott College in respect to that. If you haven't, you can check out our investment policy, and it's totally divested from any kinds of weapons or all that kind of stuff, so it's really cool. Okay, but enough about the world. Let's focus on the world here right now. The following presenters chose let's see. As many of you know, the senior project is the culmination of our students' journeys, and students, with the help of an advisor or a mentor, choose a project that demonstrates their competence in their area of study, is meaningful to them, and matters in some way to the broader world and to their community. These senior projects are an opportunity for students to challenge themselves, to express their creativity, to engage in transformative learning and reflection. In other words, it is experiential education. The following presenters chose a wide range of projects across our areas of study. These are vastly different projects, reflective of the diverse interests and approaches of our students. And yet, all of these projects seek to make an impact on our world, to change the world in beautiful ways. I hope you all will find them as inspiring and hopeful as we do. Before I turn the event over to these incredible students, please join me in thanking our wonderful faculty and staff who pitched in and volunteered their time to make this event happen. And I want to especially thank Seb, our beloved Seb, Dr. Sebastian Grant, who's leaving us next year. And she helped us so much this last week with group practices and dress rehearsals. And I just want to recognize the support, Seb, that you've shown our students in our community this week and the entire time that you've been here. And then finally, to all the parents, grandparents, friends, families, thank you for sharing your precious children with us. They are the center of what we do and why we do it. And their passion and creativity and conviction are the future of our world. So, enough, let's get started with the students. Please welcome our first outstanding presenter, Sage Pineda.
Good afternoon. Oh, I know there's more people in here than that. Good afternoon. There we go. My name is Sage Panetta, and I'm an almost graduate in the Social Justice Studies undergrad program and a scholar in the Social Justice Studies and Community Organizing graduate program. For my project, I worked with a team of 10 students, faculty, staff, and colleagues from other colleges to organize a 3-day teach-in on Palestine and Israel. Now, before I begin, I just want to name that it was really challenging to write a speech that encompasses our event. In discussing Palestine and Israel, our current political reality forces us to reduce our own political beliefs into binaries. Either you're on this side or you're not. A more historically complex or nuanced perspective is often interpreted as antagonistic, or in the context of Palestine and Israel, Zionist. My project sought to bring this more nuanced and humanizing perspective, and it was not easy. And in this speech, I'm trying to do the same. To show my own vulnerability, my confusion, my questions, to recognize that I am not some shining ally in the hill. So when I initially started thinking about taking on the teach-in as my senior project, I felt completely overwhelmed at the idea. But there was this little voice that kept whispering inside of me, just feel it out, there's something there. And so I listened to it, and I decided to do it. And a few weeks after making that decision, I learned that my Jewish ancestors fled persecution in Lithuania. Initially, I was shocked. And then, day by day, a recognition began to creep in. I knew that my passion for this project was not just about my love for other human beings and a vision for social change. My passion for this project ran generations deep. And in this, I saw my solidarity with Palestinians blossom, as have many, many other Jews today. We created this teach-in to educate our community on Israel's occupation of Palestine so we could deepen our own communal analysis of the genocide. We wanted to humanize, not sensationalize, the violence. And instead of a right or wrong approach, we sought to combat polarization and dehumanization through discussion and exposure to numerous, sometimes contradicting perspectives. And so in January, with this vision of humanizing in mind, we began organizing. And it was the 10 of us working together. Our organizing took many shapes: video calls, late nights, visioning, a whole lot of discussion, a whole lot of learning about history, and a lot of food. Our time together built friendships and taught us how to engage in the kind of conversations we wanted in the teach-in, those filled with dual truths and respectful disagreements. And eventually, after 3.5 months of work, it was April 17th, the first day of the teach-in. I was terrified. I thought, what if no one understands why this approach to this topic is so important? What if I'm labeled a Zionist and ostracized? And what if my project actually hurts people? And before I could dive too deep into these thoughts, people began to trickle in, and suddenly we were off. With Dr. Nancy Koppelman and Dr. April Hoffman, we immersed ourselves in stories of different people and families throughout the last century in Palestine and Israel. We'd read the story which outlined a decision point and then make the decision as if we were the characters of the story. Here I saw people work really hard to broaden their thinking and recognize the humanness and complexity of these histories. I saw these stories bring tears to people's eyes. In one account, understanding, even if disagreeing, why a family member would choose to accept payment from Hamas to build tunnels under their home despite not supporting their agenda. knowing the tunnels are used to support food, medical supplies, and other essential items Palestinians in Gaza can't access because of Israel's blockade. But also knowing that the tunnels are used to transport weapons and may result in their home being a target of Israeli violence. What factors are influencing your decision? How could extra income support your children, your sister, your elderly mother? Is it worth the risk? These were the kind of difficult, nuanced questions we discussed, often finding that there was no right answer. Through this workshop, we zoomed in on history. We grabbed this abstract scope of a century of events and welcomed it into the salt and meat of our bodies. And before I knew it, it was the second day. Dr. Shireen Saadeh spoke of the resilience and joy of Palestinian people despite occupation. As I looked around through my own teary eyes, I saw others recognizing and appreciating this truth that joy is resistance. Most of us had been consuming horrid images of dismembered children's bodies and videos of people running from missile strikes and falling buildings. These images easily divorce us from the humanity of everyday Palestinians and Israelis harmed in the violence. And it can invisibilize the simple fact that they too wish for joyful lives, safe homes, healthy families, and happy children. Next, Serene led us in a workshop on news literacy, where we analyzed different news articles to unpack their lenses and biases. I heard people recognizing the differences of narratives and identifying what was left out of certain stories. And it became clear that this workshop was a gift of insight into the way our own beliefs and socialization affect our perspectives. That we inherently miss parts of the story because of our own blind spots. And in just the blink of an eye, it was the last day, Friday. I woke up that morning feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. I had become so attached to our learning community over these past few days, and I was not ready to let that go. It felt so safe and so loving. Midday, we had a keynote address with Dr. Mohammed Dajani, a Jerusalem-born activist who spoke on the values of peace and moderation. And I remember a moment where I looked over at a friend of mine and just saw their eyes full of tears. And I quietly walked over and asked how they were doing. And in a wavering tone, they whispered, "The things he's saying are just so different than how I see them." I felt the same. I looked around the room and could see my own anger, grief, and confusion reflected in the faces of some others. And I suddenly realized that although it had not been planned, we needed to debrief after the keynote. I could sense that people needed to voice their feelings and be witnessed in the depths of their hearts. So after the keynote was over, we walked outside to the yoga circle and began to share. Our people felt confused, angry, sad, awakened, inspired. In myself, I felt a similar combination. I thought, how can someone advocate for moderation when there's an act of genocide going on? What is he saying that I'm not hearing? A few others echoed a similar sentiment, and we dove into our questions. What does it mean to be an ally to impacted communities when different parts of the communities are calling for different things? And is it fair for us, people in the West, to be criticizing the perspective of a Palestinian activist who has years of lived experience? And in this conversation, I saw the fruit of the last few days being harvested. I could see the value in what Muhammad brought, and so could others, even if we did not agree or needed to dig deeper. And finally, we had our speaker panel and communal discussion, a space to ask each other questions and learn more about history, collaboration, and resistance. On our panel, we had Dr. Nancy Koppelman from Evergreen College, Dr. Serene Saade, Dr. April Hoffman, and Dr. Todd Miller from Prescott College, and Dr. Matthew DeMau from George Washington University. We employed our skills of nuance and humanized thinking and narrative analysis as we dove deep into lingering questions over a shared meal to close out the teach-in. And all at once it was over. Over 150 participants over the 3 days, all there to learn. And as I reflect, what I experienced in the teach-in was a space that was gentle and safe. It felt like we were seated at a kitchen table surrounded by the bravest, most loving, and brilliant people. And why did they come? Because they cared. Because they were curious to learn more. And because they were strong enough to choose to be in a space where they knew that their thinking would be challenged. And I cried at the end of each day, holding the grief of violence in one hand and the joy of our solidarity in the other. As a community and a liberal arts institution, we demonstrated that we can engage in really difficult conversations to expand and change our thinking, not reinforce it. And that it can be done respectfully, with an ethic of love, and our community will emerge more connected from it. And in this speech, we're asked to answer the question, why is your project important? And I hope that you, as fellow human beings, can see why. Thank you. Next up, I want to introduce the wonderful Peter Watson.
Thanks, Sage. All right. Good afternoon. My name is Peter Watson, and the project I'll be presenting is titled Wetland Restoration Assessment and Planning. I'm going to start with a brief introduction to the Rio Grande watershed and some of the issues that it faces. Here you can see the watershed. And for context, I'm going to show you Prescott, where we are now, for folks who aren't familiar with the area. So Prescott is sitting just right there. And again, this is the Rio Grande watershed. I grew up in the Jemez Mountains, which are a mountain range that's part of the watershed. You can see them right here. And I've loved these rivers and forests for as long as I can remember. They're where I go to hunt, fish, pick berries, get firewood, and be in nature. As I've grown older, I've become more aware of issues that the mountain ecosystem faces and become more and more involved in their conservation and stewardship. The Rio Grande watershed is hugely important for New Mexico. As we say, agua es vida, water is life. Most of the state uses the river for drinking water, recreation, and livelihoods, and so it's an enormously significant part of our culture. Ecologically, it's the lifeblood of the region, connecting mountain habitats across the state and providing a home for hundreds of native species. I've been fortunate enough to work for the past couple years for an organization called Rio Grande Return, which does watershed restoration in New Mexico. And so that may beg the question from some of you, what about this watershed needs restoring? And so I'm going to go into that briefly. A brief history of this watershed and why it needs restoring is that the headwater streams of the Rio Grande were historically beaver-dominated wetland ecosystems. And over the past 200 years, there's been extensive logging, cattle grazing, and trapping of beavers in the mountains, which has led to ecosystem change in many of the headwater streams, causing erosion and drying of wetlands. And so our work at Rio Grande Return is to reverse these effects and make our watershed more productive and resilient. So, in service of this, we assess the areas of the watershed to determine the extent to which they're degraded and whether or not we can do impactful restoration work. This restoration assessment was done in Cruces Basin Wilderness. Here you can see a picture of what it looks like in the wilderness. This is Diablo Creek. And on the map here, I've outlined the wilderness boundary in green. And then here, these colored polygons represent the stream reaches that I surveyed. And lastly, I've overlaid a Forest Service grazing allotment map to demonstrate one of the ongoing problems in this wilderness area, which is that there's a lot of unregulated cattle grazing going on these Forest Service allotments by cows owned by private ranchers. Our goal with this project was to determine what stressors were impacting the watershed and how we could address them. In October of last year, I performed field surveys in the wilderness to answer these questions, and I'll go over that here. So here's my survey rig. This thing was great. It was an 83 Toyota Tercel. It's basically a go-kart sized tractor all over the mountains. And so my job in this survey was basically to read the landscape and use my knowledge of natural history to interpret what was going on. And a lot of what I was seeing were streams that were heavily impacted by cattle. Indicators of this were trampled banks, overgrazed vegetation, and poor water quality. I also found a lot of gullying and erosion caused by historic roads and cattle grazing. And I also found a lot of indicators of what this ecosystem used to look like. One example of this was this abandoned historic beaver dam, which would have ponded water about 6 feet higher than the stream channel currently sits and created a massive wetland. In some places, I found active beaver dams, which was good to see, and there were some large wetlands formed by these beavers. This map in the background is part of what we produced for our stakeholder group, which for this project included Carson National Forest, grazing permittees, and other restoration organizations like Western Wildlands Alliance and Amigos Bravos. It's interactive, so stakeholders were able to click on it and see individual data points and get information about each of the reaches surveyed. So, for example, if a stakeholder was interested in this reach here, which is Lower Diablo Creek, where that first picture was taken, they could go ahead and click on it and scroll through, and they could get a description of the reach, the title, Diablo Confluence Meadow. And these descriptions were written based on notes that I took in the field, and they include information about the vegetation community, whether or not there's woody vegetation present, any signs of grazing, any thing of note about the channel morphology. And so these were all important things for our stakeholders to know. And the stakeholders were also able to click on individual data points, and I'll go through that here. Oops. So each of these data points is a georeference data point, and there's a lot of different information that I recorded on each one. And then there were also photos with each one so that somebody in this stakeholder group who hasn't been to this watershed can look through this data and get a feel for what's going on. The next component of the project was analyzing our data and compiling this report. So I worked with Karen Menetre from Rio Grande Return to write this report, which I have here, and I'm going to put it on the back table as well so folks can check it out after. The first part of the report interprets the results of the field survey and lays out what stressors are impacting the watershed. The next section of the report is basically about, okay, we've identified a lot of these stressors in the watershed. How do we address them? And so I worked with a lot of different resources to develop this toolbox for some different techniques that could be used to restore this watershed. And here's some examples of what the toolbox included, some of the different pages. And then I have a page zoomed in so that you folks can see some of the information that was included on a toolbox page for our stakeholder group. This page in particular is about beaver dam analogs, which are structures that mimic natural beaver activity to form wetlands. Our work at Rio Grande Return relies heavily on process-based restoration, the goal of which is to restore whole ecological processes rather than just putting Band-Aids on individual impairments. The techniques we suggest in this report are ones that we've used successfully in similar watersheds across northern New Mexico. The outcomes of this project so far have been great. Our report is currently being used to write a wetland action plan, which is a New Mexico state document that outlines and provides funding for the stewardship of the watershed. Some of the next steps for me are that I'll be leading a field crew with Rio Grande Return this summer, and I'll be returning to Cruces Basin to resurvey some specific wetland sites. These mountains are my home, and I hope to be engaged in their stewardship for many years to come. Thank you. And next, I'd like to introduce Aaron Stauffer.
It works. Can you all hear me? I'm a little shorter than all these people. There we go. Hello, everybody. As wonderful Peter said, I'm Aaron Stauffer, and today I'm going to start with some mind reading. My prediction is that everybody in this room is either a menstruator, has menstruated, or has come from a menstruator. My degree isn't in mind reading, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty spot on with that. Today I'm going to share why menstruation is so essential and why I felt I needed to integrate it into outdoor education. I wanted to bring up that I'm using the word menstruator as an inclusive term because not everybody who menstruates identifies as a woman. Menstruation is a shared experience despite someone's gender. It all started when I was 19 years old on a 3-month backpacking semester program. I felt strong traversing the mountains of Colorado with a curiosity and fervor to see what was over the next ridgeline. But one morning, I woke up and everything felt harder. My pack felt like a boulder strapped to me. It took me every ounce of energy I had to get up and over that next hill. I felt endlessly famished and in desperate need of a long nap. Some of you may know how exhilarating it can feel to be in the backcountry utilizing the strength of your body and mind. And some of you may understand how frustrating it can be to have your body ability pivot just like that due to your period or menstrual cycle. The challenge for me did not end there with my body's fluctuation. I felt I needed to silently push through the exhaustion and fatigue of my period to keep up and feel I had a place in the outdoor world. I went through Prescott College expeditionary classes with this view, hiding the menstruating part of myself, until I was reading about social formations and power dynamics in the outdoors. I had a view-shattering aha moment. This article was explaining how women and non-binary folks have to work at 110% to be seen as competent in this field. This presented me with a problem. How can menstruators function at 110% all the time when their body is fluctuating every day? It did not make sense that Prescott College was training the future outdoor educators while menstruators still felt they needed to hide the menstruating part of themselves. Couldn't both exist together? Couldn't menstruators communicate the fatigue and cramps and challenges that they face and be supported the way we support a rolled ankle on trail? I was dealing with a wicked problem, one of those problems that reinforces itself over and over and over. Menstruators need to work at 110% all the time to be seen as competent, but they have a body that fluctuates in its ability to perform. To give you a better understanding of this wicked problem, I'm going to give you a little introduction to the menstrual cycle. You all probably had a version of this in 4th grade. But my mind reading prediction is that you might learn a little bit something today. I want to note that each person who menstruates is unique, and therefore their menstrual cycle is also unique, but I will be referring to data that was based off of the average menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is more than just a monthly bleed. It is on average a 28-day cycle that can be broken down into 4 sections. During these 4 phases, different biological happenings occur to develop an egg for fertilization. If that does not happen, the egg and the buildup of the uterine lining shut out in the period. The menstrual cycle is not just about reproduction. While the biological happenings are important, the hormonal components can affect a person's body and mind day to day. This is the hormonal happenings of the menstrual cycle. I want to introduce you to 2 key hormones of the cycle. The first one, here we go, estrogen, dominant in the first half of the cycle. Second one, progesterone, dominant in the second half of the cycle. While these hormones' main job is to aid in reproductive system, they influence most other systems, including cardiovascular, immune, digestive, brain, energy, so on and so forth. In my research, I focused on things that might be directly correlated to outdoor education. I looked at stamina and how progesterone can increase the resting heart rate and decrease someone's stamina strength ability. I learned how estrogen can increase a person's ability to recover and gain muscle after extraneous exercise. I discovered how in the menstruator's ovulatory phase, ligaments and tendon injuries are more likely. As we can see, menstruation is more than just bleeding. The American College of Obstetrician and Gynecology suggests that menstruation should be considered a 5th vital sign due to its interaction with many bodily functions, and minute responsiveness to health issues. So how does this all translate into adventure education? My experience on my backpacking semester depicts this well. Some days, a menstruator can be strong and capable and climb the next mountain, and the next, they can feel as if their body is decaying. This constructed standard, often upheld in adventure education, of running at 110% of the time, becomes difficult to obtain. After learning the scientific explanation of the menstrual cycle, I grappled with a couple of questions. How can we change the narrative around menstruation? How can we create an outdoor space where the fluctuations of a menstrual cycle are taken into account? How can we make the outdoors a more inclusive space that values all bodies and minds? I had felt I had stumbled on a key that utilizes education around menstruation to start a conversation on inclusivity in the outdoors. I took the route of education. So here's my process of what I ended up doing. I boiled down all my research and analysis into 2 avenues of education. The first avenue was through a weekend-long camping trip for people who bleed. It educated them on the menstrual cycle, the hormones, and how these hormones can affect a menstruator's body and mind. Sharing this knowledge with menstruators felt essential, but did not feel like I was making the social change I was looking for. With that, I developed an hour-long workshop to be shared with adventure education students and instructors here at Prescott College. This workshop taught about the menstrual cycle and how it can affect an individual's experience, and prompted participants on how we can utilize this information to make a more equitable space. The classes usually started with an awkward air and glazed eyes. But by the end, menstruators and non-menstruators shared about how blown away they had not known the menstrual cycle can affect a person's body and mind. This education will now be utilized in the orientation that all new Prescott College students go through. Despite me spieling at you all for the past 6 minutes about periods, it's actually greater than that. Menstruation has been my avenue of passion for questioning how we form community through social norms and formations. Cecil Goodman once said, "When we go outside, we do not magically leave behind our positionalities or the social formations that give shape to our lives. Power, race, gender, class, and other social formations and relations of power still exist in the outdoors or in wilderness on an outdoor expedition. However, with critical awareness and education, being outdoors in a group community can also allow us time and space to draw attention to those social formations and think critically about how to create a more supportive, equitable, and humanizing environment." Periods hold so much shame and secrecy in our society. With the critical examination and education around menstruation, we can utilize this avenue to examine other social formations, to make the outdoors and our society a more equitable place. This project grew into what it was with the exposure to many concepts here at Prescott College. I want to thank Cecil Goodman for patiently helping me understand social formations and how they affect my experience outside and everybody else's. I want to thank you all for sitting here, maybe learning something new, maybe facing some awkwardness. Your curiosity and time is much appreciated. So that is my project, Minding Menstruation. Woo! Thank you all. I want to introduce our next speaker, who is an online student who recorded a nice little visual presentation for us all.
Hello everyone, I am Anthony Wilson, and today I am presenting a presentation on my stage play entitled, "It's No Ordinary Thing," and how it relates to social change. So without further ado, let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. Essentially, I wrote a full-length play entitled "It's No Ordinary Thing" for my senior project, and founded a production company called Diamond Child Productions to facilitate the ongoing aspects of its production. As it turns out, I was surprised and honored this spring to be chosen as the opening reading at the 21st Dublin Theatre Festival, which by the time you watch this recording, I will have already attended. Let's look at a brief synopsis of my work. The question of what happens to a dream deferred has been asked numerous times. But what happens when we dare to dream? It's No Ordinary Thing invites you on Nathaniel's odyssey through the dreamscapes of the ancestral realm, where he is forced to grapple with the majestic unfolding of his fears and embrace his innermost truths. This non-narrative, autoethnographic, interactive, 3D hologram play intertwines dreams, ancestry, and sexuality in a mesmerizing tapestry. Join us for a live reading by debut playwright Nathaniel Wilson as we delve into the enigmatic dance between daring to dream and the forces that seek to suppress it. Now, one might ask, what's so unordinary about It's No Ordinary Thing? Well, hold on, because I'm about to tell you. It's No Ordinary Thing is said to be the world's first non-narrative, autoethnographic, 3D hologram stage play, and it is based upon the sleeping dreams of I, Anthony Nathaniel Wilson. One of the most exciting parts of producing this play is partnering with Silas Vieta, which is a European-based theater company that creates immersive experiences for audiences all over the world through the use of 3D holograms. The purpose of using the 3D holograms is to recreate that dreamlike feeling on stage, because this is a dream play. And so here on the screen is a snippet from my dream journal. And each scene in the play is based off of a dream I've had. And all I did was look at the dream and then imagine how it would look on stage. So it's a process of from dream to dramaturgy. So I invite you to read this snippet at your own discretion. And while you're reading it, I will read to you this a small piece of the scene that is based on this dream. Ibashe Obatala, Obatala, return me back to the innocence I once knew. Obatala, that innocence was you. You are those simple joys that abides in the smiling hand of a child, waiting as the afternoon train passes by. His smiling hand, and his smile, and his hand shine brighter than a billion suns, for he is at home with those simple joys. It is this child that knows the secrets and the magic of life. It is innocence. Innocence is what we long for, that never-ending wonder of something new, uncharted, and undreamed. We long to return back to the innocence of gestating in the womb. Obatala, restore our innocence 16 times over, and then over again, so that we never have to know, but always wonder. And wonder 8 and time, and time, and 8, and 16, and time, and 16 again. Ashe, ashe, ashe. All right. So now that you have an introduction to some of the script material, let's talk about how this play came about. It's No Ordinary Thing is born for and from the purpose of authentic storytelling and demonstrating that experimental theater is a primary tool for social change. What I mean by authentic storytelling is, first, I noticed that there was a need for authentic storytelling in theater. Essentially, I define authentic storytelling as telling one's innermost truths without judging it, and not for the purposes of entertainment or being inspirational, but because authentically telling our story is liberating and an act of revolution. This brings me to my next point, and that is experimental theater is a primary tool for social change. Experimental theater is a loosely defined term for theater that does not fall under the umbrella of traditional contemporary or classical theater. Frankly, this is what makes experimental theater liberating, because it is an open-ended art form. Historically, experimental theater has been a primary tool for social change. For example, when Slovenia was a part of Yugoslavia, the experimental forms of theater communities established a space contrary to the politically supervised and controlled and regulated art scene. I wish to share with you this quote by Augusto Boal, and this quote deeply inspires my work, and it deeply inspires why I'm doing this play. The quote is, if we do not trespass, if we do not go beyond our cultural norms, our state of oppression, the limits imposed upon us, even the law itself, which should be transformed. If we do not transform, if we do not trespass in this, we can never be free. To free ourselves is to trespass and to transform. It is through a creation of the new that which has not yet existed begins to exist. To free yourself is to trespass. To trespass is to exist. To free ourselves is to exist. To free yourself is to exist. Augusto Boal. Now, why in the world is It's No Ordinary Thing important? It's No Ordinary Thing is important because it is a demonstration of the power that independent artists have to create and produce our own works. A quote that I love by playwright Monica Byrne is, "For theater as we know it to have any future at all, a new economic model must take its place, founded on a simple principle: fund artists directly, then let the artists produce their own work, rent their own venues, and pay their own collaborators." Secondly, "It's No Ordinary Thing" is important because it shows what happens when a Black man dares to dream and keeps dreaming. Black Americans suffer from the highest rate of sleep disorders in the USA, and thus not only are many Black people not getting quality sleep, it also means that we are not dreaming at the rate in which we should. So it is revolutionary to show that I am a Black man who gets quality sleep and who also dreams. On this screen are my inspirations and the people, the artists, the playwrights, the theater makers who inspire my work, who inspire my thinking around art, and who inspire the direction that I'm moving in producing this play. All right, so this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you all for attending my presentation. And I will close out this presentation by telling you why the play is entitled "It's No Ordinary Thing." The title of the play comes from a dream that I had in 2020. Here is that dream. In my sleep this morning, I heard the voice of a woman singing me a song. I don't remember the song in its entirety, but it started with, "It's no ordinary thing." And the last line was, "Love yourself above all the love that others have for you." But what shocked me most is that when I woke up and opened my eyes, I saw the figure of a short, small man. He was shirtless, sitting in a wooden chair. He had on red pants and was just sitting there smoking a cigar. I saw him with my eyes wide open, but then he disappeared in less than a second. It was so quick. Thank you, and dare to dream.
Okay, let's stand up. Move our bodies around a little. Little shake. Say hi to your neighbor.
How are you doing? Pretty good, thank you. Yourself? Not bad. Yeah, just not bad. A lot of outdoor activity.
Okay, now let's try to find our seats again. No, that's great. Cool. So, hello everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Galen Lee, and this is a presentation about my senior project, Returning Rapids Western Grand Canyon, which is now transitioning into my capstone work as I pursue my Master's of Science here at Prescott College. Woo, yeah, right? So over the past 4.5 years, I have been on a journey, blending my passion for researching and protecting the environment with my enthusiasm for teaching and learning in the outdoors. Prescott College has enabled me to weave these two perspectives together, and my senior project was a true testament to both of my undergraduate degrees. So the inspiration for this project came a few years back on a class entitled Environmental Perspectives in Whitewater, taught by Joel Barnes and Kim Williams. On this class, I had the opportunity to meet Mike Dehoff and listen to his presentation about returning rapids and sediment in Cataract Canyon, which is a stretch of the Colorado River from about there to there. Sorry, that laser pointer is so shaky. It starts at the Green River and it flows all the way down to where Lake Powell begins. The work Mike and his team are doing was so profound to me that I found myself laying awake all night long underneath the Utah stars, dreaming about how I could get involved with this work. Yeah, so now is probably when you're wondering, what are returning rapids? First, we need to understand what rapids are. So a rapid is a section of river that has a relatively steep gradient, a narrow constriction, and or objects obstructing the flow of the river. These three components work together to increase the turbulence and velocity of the water, creating what many of us know as whitewater. So what is a returning rapid? It is a rapid that was once present in a river channel and now, due to sediment or flooding, has disappeared for a period of time, but is beginning to or has fully reappeared, potentially in an altered state. Now that we understand those two components, let's talk a little bit more about what creates these returning rapids. So raise your hand for me if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon. Nice, I love that. I think the Grand Canyon is one of the most spectacular parts of the entire Southwest. And it sits from, the dam right up here and all the way down to here where the lake begins. So on the northeast side, we have Glen Canyon Dam and Lake Powell. And then that water flows through the dam, comes down through the Grand Canyon, and eventually meets Lake Mead and the Hoover Dam, going on to flow to Mexico if we had it our way. These dams and reservoirs are built to spur growth and development in the region. Storing water in these reservoirs has allowed agricultural and metropolitan growth to flourish, even though we're in a desert. But dams have consequences. And damming the sediment-filled rivers of the Southwest has affected the region in many ways. So of these ways, I chose to focus my attention on the sediment itself and how that sediment has affected the Grand Canyon and just the riparian areas themselves. So what happened when the US government dammed the Colorado River? Here you will see a profile map of Western Grand Canyon with Hoover Dam on the left and the brown line representing the muddy waters of the Colorado River. In 1934, the Hoover Dam construction was completed, blocking the natural flow of the Colorado River, and then the lake started to fill. So this water hit the dam and backed up. And then on July 24th of 1983, Lake Mead reached capacity. This was the most recent time that it reached full pool, at an elevation of 1,225.83 feet. So at this point, the water backed backed up into the Western Grand Canyon, all the way to Bridge Canyon Rapid, which is at River Mile 255, if any of you know the Colorado River miles. And that's about 115 miles northeast of the dam itself. So really long lake out in the middle of the desert. Once the lake had filled, the water in that lake began to become still. And that still water allowed the sediment from the faster moving river water to drop out of the water column and build up on the bottom of the lake. That's represented here with the brown mud. This sediment building up on the bottom buried the rapids. It also buried the archaeological sites, the ecosystems, and all the cultural sites. And then through drought and over-allotment of water resources, we have begun to see this lake level drop, exposing these vast reaches of mud and sediment. And then due to declining lake levels, the river is now starting to carve its way back down through this sediment, getting back to its original river channel in some places or offset in other places, and exposing these rapids that we haven't seen in over 100 years. So with the inspiration from Mike Dehoff's work in Cataract Canyon, I chose to pursue a similar form of research, but I wanted to focus on the Colorado River in Grand Canyon National Park. I focused my research between Diamond Creek and Pierce Ferry Rapid, a stretch of the Colorado River most commonly referred to as the Western Grand Canyon, or as us river folk like to call it, Diamond Down, because you put in at Diamond and you float down. Working with the Prescott, sorry, that one made me laugh also. Working with the Prescott College warehouse, I planned the entire river trip, from pulling the gear at the warehouse to organizing the fantastic crew of people that were going to come on the research trip, getting the permits and scheduling the shuttles. All of this work really felt like a culmination of my adventure education degree. And when it came to the environmental science component of things, I worked diligently to write a research proposal that outlined the work we would be doing both in the canyon and once we returned from the canyon with our data. Doing all of this work ahead of time really set the trip up for great success and allowed us to do efficient and effective research while navigating the challenges of working in such a remote region. So these images you'll see on the next couple of slides are from my handbook, which is in the back. Don't mind the little text like this stuff. You don't need to read it. Just look at the pretty pictures and maybe the red circles. So my goal for this research was to begin documenting the changes we are seeing in these ecosystems. So I took the approach of establishing a community-engaged research project that would allow future Prescott College courses and any interested individuals who wanted to participate to go down the river and take pictures of these rapids and help us do research. I started by going through archival photos at NAU's Klein Library, and I found images dating back over 100 years, which if you've never been to an archive, you should definitely go because it's really cool. So this image was taken in 1923, 100 years before our research trip. And then this image right there was taken in 1909, which is hard for me to even comprehend. And then these colored images you can see were taken on our research trip and were our best attempts to match these archival photos. You can see changes like how wide the river is here versus how narrow it is there, and how different the stream channel looks in this image, whereas it's further left there. In early October of last year, I led our crew of 10 participants on a 4-day river trip with Steve Munsell as my mentor. During this initial trip, we successfully matched 5 archival photos, like those seen on that last slide, which helped to provide context to what these rapids once looked like. Additionally, we established 7 data points, such as these 2 images. So this data point shows Surprise Rapid, which is a rapid that has seen significant change in the last couple of years. There didn't used to be this little bit of whitewater here. And this image shows Lava Cliff Rapid, which at one point was considered the most dangerous rapid in the entire Grand Canyon. Now, due to the lake and this sediment you can see here, it's not much more than a small riffle. Both of these rapids, as well as many others in the Western Grand Canyon, are beginning to show signs of changes, and having these initial photos will allow us to track these changes as time moves forward. After collecting the data and returning back to Prescott, I created 2 handbooks. The first, Returning Rapids Western Grand Canyon Handbook, outlines our findings, showing side-by-side archival photo matches as well as data points. The second, Returning Rapids Research Guide, offers a step-by-step guide for how to participate in this research, giving directions as to where to pull your boat off, how to find the point to take the picture, how to line up the picture properly, and then what to do with the images once you return from the field. At the end of this presentation, I'll have a bigger version of that QR code up on the screen. You can scan it, or if you want to take a picture so you can come back to it, then you can access those handbooks, learn more, and even potentially participate in the research. They are also on the back table. This research guide, along with the Anecdata Citizen Science database that I have recently published, aim to enable others to document the re-emerging rapids, contributing to our collective understanding of these dynamic environments and helping us understand what these environmental impacts mean for the Colorado River and the communities that depend on it. I owe a huge thank you to Mike Dehoff, Joel Barnes, Julie Monroe, Cecil Goodman, and Matthew Brown for their guidance and support. Thank you also to my partner Aaliyah and all my friends and family who joined for this trip, as well as AmeriCorps for funding the research, and of course, Kathy Young and Steve Munsell for their invaluable contributions in the warehouse and on the river. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you for listening and for your interest in this work. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and you can take a picture of that QR code if you want to. Your engagement and support are what make this work possible. And now let's give a warm welcome to Luca.
Hi, everyone. Feeling butterflies. I'm Luca, and for my senior psychology thesis, I've written an essay about the concepts of non-duality and the healing potential of unitive practices, which I'll explain what that means in depth as we get on with this. This inquiry has been based on a review of psychological theory and empirical research in combination with my own philosophy and personal experiences, and I feel proud to say that it's the most quality piece of work that I've produced in my academic career. I also hosted an open discussion forum as an outlet to engage the community in these topics. I have immense gratitude for everyone who has entertained my musings over the last couple of months, and especially to my mentor, Dr. Sebastian Grant, without whom I definitely would have found myself conceptually lost throughout this project. Thank you all for being here. I grew up in a little Vermont Cape house in a forest of vibrant greenery. The acre of land we owned had raspberry bushes, a field of wildflowers, and a babbling brook with a waterfall. The backyard had magnificent views of two of the largest mountains in the state. I grew up feeling deeply held by this land and the gentle hills and quaint villages of rural Vermont. I didn't think of it this way, but looking back, it's clear that I had a deep sense of interconnectivity with this land. I don't think I really felt separate from the ecosystem in my backyard growing up. I mention this place because when I was thinking about how to explain this concept of unity that I've been grappling with throughout this project, the first thing that I thought of was the experience of running around in that forest as a child, soaking myself in our waterfall, or climbing the spruce trees that lined the property. In these experiences, I was pure awareness. Also very relevant to mention is that I grew up with two extremely psychologically and also spiritually oriented people as parents. I do feel that I got lucky to have parents who were interested in such things, but I think that an even truer statement is that they got pretty lucky to have a child who is interested in entertaining their musings. I think that my immense interest in ideas beyond the material realm is clearly a combination of nature and nurture, but I have immense gratitude for my parents for encouraging this side of me. I've been thinking about the ideas that manifested into this project for at least 10 years. And to prove it, I'm going to read a post that I made on the online question and answer forum Quora when I was 15 years old. In my browsing of the site, I had stumbled upon the open question of what is the origin of consciousness? I had been thinking about this subject quite a bit at the time, and I had also been having lots of conversations with my dad about it. So, in my admittedly a bit arrogant 15-year-old mind, I thought I'd give it a go. This is what I wrote. A very interesting theory is called one mind. It basically says that the universe and consciousness are impossible to differentiate. As in, consciousness has always just been in the universe, and it's kind of just a force floating around the universe that sometimes is manifested in material things. When this happens, it creates a conscious organism. The one-mind theory is extraordinarily challenging for the human brain to conceptualize, which is why it seems so ridiculous. But this is essentially the only fairly legitimate theory that exists right now. There is some talk of scientists being well on the way to finding a more realistic answer, although there's a fair chance that it will result in just more reasoning behind one mind. Basically, if you really want to know the answer, scour the internet, be confused, read some books, be more confused, think about it for hours on end, start to question your existence, and then maybe come out of it with somewhat of a more in-depth idea of why we exist like we are. When contemplating what I should do for my senior project, I realized that this was my chance to try to formalize all of these years of ideas into a tangible product. I have no doubt that in the years to come, my ideas will evolve, but I think of this paper that I've written as a conceptual timepiece to look back on, and I feel very proud of what I've managed to write. As opposed to other seniors who spent their time exploring remote rivers, organizing internationally powerful events, or constructing evocative sculptures, I've spent most of my time in the last 2 months in coffee shops trying to wrap my head around these relatively obtuse ideas, which ultimately all revolve around the human condition. I actually got pretty close to an explanation of the theory of non-duality in my 15-year-old Quora post, but to elaborate on that, I'll describe it as the ontology of ultimate non-separation. It points out that as humans, we typically think that I am me and you are you, that at our core we are distinct from one another and the world. This allows for and leads to all manner of human phenomena, such as capitalism, shame, anxiety, identity-based oppression, environmental destruction, and the list goes on. Viewing ourselves as distinct allows us to construct a self-based way of living, which includes ideas and expectations of who we should or shouldn't be, and the tendency to work towards these personal expectations regardless of impacts on others or on the earth. It causes us to make judgments about events in our lives, that some are good and others are bad, so that when things don't go our way, we suffer tremendously. Some psychologists argue that American society as a whole has developed a narcissism complex. Alan D. Kanner argues that the egoic self regards humans as isolated and fundamentally separate from the rest of nature, as superior to and in charge of the rest of creation. Non-dualism is, in part, the theory that the separate self, which we have come to accept as real and true, is an illusion in its entirety. In a non-dual way of being, or what I've been calling a unitive state, we experience no judgment for ourselves, others, or the state of the world, as there is an understanding of it all as manifestations of a unified whole. The Eastern and Western traditions which support this theory suggest that not only is there no judgment in non-duality, but that the experience of unity or pure awareness is impeccably positive. Non-dual thinker Rupert Spira suggests that love or pure intimacy is the only experience that awareness knows. The first part of the paper that I've written is an attempt to thoroughly examine the theory of non-duality, considering ideas from Western psychology and philosophy, Buddhism, the Hindu school of Advaita Vedanta, and I've also brought in several indigenous perspectives, as common across many of these ancient traditions are deeply embedded ideas and intuitions of interconnectivity. This first section provided the theoretical framework from which to discuss the practical applications of non-duality. The goal here was to make a case for the long-term psychological benefits of practices that bring about feelings of unity. It's obvious that these feelings are enjoyable and are certainly worth seeking out for this reason alone. Less obvious, however, is that these experiences have the power to permanently transform our lives for the better. I also assert that these experiences can be found in our everyday lives. You don't need to meditate in a cave for a week or have an ego death on a psychedelic trip in order to reap these benefits. Unity is something that can be uncovered while drinking coffee, listening to the birds, or driving your car. When people think about the healing possibilities of traditions like Buddhism, they often imagine that something very major has to take place, or that they need to practice meditation or yoga with a degree of discipline that probably doesn't feel accessible. The word enlightenment gets thrown around a lot. I've come to firmly believe that a sense of unity can be found in all manner of activities that many of us do frequently. One example of this that applies to many of us at Prescott College and to myself is the unitive potential of outdoor adventure. And I feel lucky enough to have had a variety of outdoor experiences that have been immersive enough to dissolve my sense of self. For me, the combination of a powerful flow state and the intake of unfathomable beauty of the earth has created very strong experiences of deep presence and unity. These experiences have given me a powerful sense of meaning and a feeling of perfection, that although there may be hardship in my life and in the world, it all possesses profound beauty. I know, both through my research and my own life experiences, that these discoveries can be made through all kinds of activities. In my paper, I chose to explore music, sports, outdoor adventure, meditation, dance, and psychedelic experiences, and I found research supporting the incredible unitive potential in each of these. I also believe that with the right mindset, there are endless experiences that can induce unity powerful enough to be life-changing. In the event that I hosted this past Monday, I set about explaining the content of my thesis in a short presentation, then held a discussion forum for my peers to relate these ideas to their own lives. I was pleasantly surprised that my words seemed to deeply resonate with my audience. I do believe that the subject that I've been discussing is relevant to all, but it gave me great joy to see that I was putting into words an experience that is felt by most, but not often voiced. I feel confident that I'll continue to engross myself in these subjects for the rest of my life, both through reflecting on my own life and through writing. The paper that I've written is my first foray into academic writing out of personal interest, rather than to fulfill an assignment, and I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed the process. Whether in graduate school or in my non-academic life, I hope to continue writing in this way. I've had the ambition of writing a book for a very long time, and this project gave me quite a bit of confidence that I just might be able to pull that off. Thank you so much for being here. Next, I want to welcome to the stage my friend Leah Goldner.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leah Goldner. I'm going to move this down. I'm also shorter than a lot of these other people here. So, last summer, I completed my senior project called Springs and Springs-Dependent Ecosystems. I spent some time in the mountains of the San Juan National Forest in southern Colorado, serving little tiny alpine springs, and today I would love to share that journey with you all. So I chose this expeditionary research project because I wanted an impactful senior project that would combine both of my degrees, environmental studies and adventure education. I'd taken a few environmental studies classes here at Prescott College that piqued my interest in water and ecology, and one class in particular, Water in the West, with Joel Barnes, sparked my interest particularly in springs. In this class, I learned what springs are and how they form, as locations where groundwater is exposed above the surface of the earth. I also learned that springs are incredibly important to our ecosystems as teeny tiny worlds that hold immense amounts of biodiversity. At Prescott College, I've also taken adventure education courses where I learned how to plan backcountry expeditions, including the budgeting, risk management, and logistical aspects of these trips. One of my mentors for this project, Joel Barnes, suggested that I reach out to an organization called the Springs Stewardship Institute. The Springs Stewardship Institute, or SSI, is an organization that is based in Flagstaff that, quote, works to improve communication among land managers, to survey, rehabilitate, and steward springs systems. I contacted the director of this organization, Dr. Larry Stevens, and we spoke about what a research project for me would look like within the organization. The Springs Stewardship Institute maintains a database of all of the springs that they have surveyed from all around the world. As a result, they are able to see locations that are missing valuable data about springs. I really loved the idea of doing a project somewhere in the mountains of the Southwest, and so Dr. Stevens shared with me that the organization was lacking a lot of data in the southwestern corner of Colorado. They had done some surveys there between 10 and 20 years ago, but they wanted updated information on both new and previously surveyed springs. So Dr. Stevens and I settled on a project idea, me doing a survey of springs in the San Juan National Forest. Once I had my location selected, I started to plan the actual expedition. I started by going on the Springs Stewardship Institute's database, and I searched for springs that they had previously surveyed in this area. This map on the left shows the spring surveys that SSI had done in this area before typically between the late 1990s and early 2000s and 2010s. I took notes on the ones that had been surveyed, and I began to put together a list of springs to go to. I also looked at topo maps from the United States Geological Survey to see where more springs could be located. And in the end, I had a list of 34 different springs between the northern and eastern parts of the San Juan Mountains within the San Juan National Forest. Then I began working on planning the traveling part of this trip. I was able to look back at trip planning and expedition resources from previous field courses that I'd taken at Prescott College. I put together an itinerary for this trip. I planned it to last a month, and for each day I made a list of all the different springs I would survey, as well as places where I would camp and the travel times for hiking and driving. I also put together a budget, a food planning list, and a packing list. Finally, I made a risk management plan with the help of my adventure education mentor, Cecil Goodman, and the risk management director for Prescott College. This included evacuation routes, emergency contacts for me and my friend that came on the trip with me, and maps of all the different areas we were going to go to. Once I had finished planning the trip, I began to work with Joel Barnes and Dr. Stevens to develop a set of protocols that I would use at each survey site to collect research data. This included georeferencing data and data about the water, such as temperature, pH, conductivity, and turbidity. I would then take notes on the conditions of each site, the landscape, and the organisms that I found when I was taking my samples. I also wrote protocol for the collection of macroinvertebrate samples at each site. Probably the coolest part of this project was all of the really cool critters I got to find in the springs. Springs are incredible sources of biodiversity, and so in and around the different springs I went to were so many living things, tons of animals, macroinvertebrates, insects, butterflies, birds, and so much more. This picture on the top left was probably my favorite find. This is a juvenile tiger salamander, and I think they are adorable. I also found this beautiful greenish blue butterfly at a bunch of the springs I went to, and this thin-legged wolf spider. Sorry if you don't like spiders. These are some of the critters that I found at the healthier springs I went to: beetle larvae, a predaceous diving beetle, and a caddisfly larva, which are really cool and unique because they actually build their own shells out of small pieces of wood and little pebbles. And on the bottom right, this is a field chickweed flower that I typically found at the lower elevation springs I went to. So upon returning to Prescott, I had to spend some time sifting through all the data that I collected. I made maps and graphs. For example, up here on the right, this is a map of the water temperature of all of the different springs I went to, as well as a graph of that data showing that water temperature tends to decline with higher elevation springs. I also made graphs demonstrating the relationship between elevation and the other variables I studied at each spring, such as conductivity. Water conductivity is a measure of water's ability to pass an electrical current, and the higher the water's conductivity, the higher the likelihood is that that water has been polluted. There's more stuff in the water. Lower conductivity at higher elevation springs indicated to me that the higher a spring is located, and typically this means it's farther away from the influence of pollution and development, the less likely it is to actually be polluted. So why should you care about little tiny pools of water? Springs are really unique markers of biodiversity and overall ecosystem health. By studying springs, we can get an idea of the various environmental impacts that a particular ecosystem might be facing. Throughout this project, I surveyed some really healthy springs, but I also surveyed some really concerning ones. There were a few springs that I went to on this trip that the Spring Stewardship Institute had previously surveyed that were now completely gone from the landscape, maybe due to landslides from fires in the area or from road building or other forms of development. I also went to some springs that did still have water in them, but that water was so acidic it was no longer able to support life. These were typically near ranches and were facing runoff from roads and serious impacts from cattle. I was also able to determine that there were some springs in this area that were threatened because at the time of my survey, they seemed relatively healthy, but they were very close to roads or ranches or trailheads or otherwise at a really great risk for landscape damage. The Spring Stewardship Institute uses spring data in order to take action in ecosystem advocacy and protection. The research area that I chose for this project represented a deficit in their data, and so I was able to fill in a lot of those gaps for them. I provided them with valuable data that they can now use to protect these springs and other springs in the future. That will positively impact this landscape as a whole. Typically, when we think of environmental advocacy and stewardship, we think of the big picture. But when we take a closer look, we can also learn a lot about that environment. You don't necessarily need to take out a hand lens or an expensive water monitor, but the next time you see a body of water, take a closer look. Examine the landscape around it. Try to figure out what could be impacting that water. It could be a tiny alpine spring, like these ones that I studied. It could be the raging Colorado River. Even the tiniest seeps of water coming through a canyon wall in the desert can tell us a lot and can help us look at the whole picture of that environment from every angle. We are able to observe the overall health of an ecosystem, which can change how we interact with that ecosystem. We care more about that space. Next time you're out in nature, whether you're deep in the backcountry somewhere, or if you're just walking along Butte Creek right in downtown Prescott, I invite you to take a closer look. If you are interested in getting involved with the Spring Stewardship Institute, you can find them by Googling the organization's name or by going to their website here, or you can come up to me after and I can give you more info. They really love to get volunteers out for spring surveys, and currently they're working on a huge project right in our backyard, completing an inventory of springs in the Verde River watershed. They're doing this to help understand the river's flow patterns and all of the different ecosystems that it supports. You can find more information about this and their other projects on their website. Thank you all so much. Next, I would love to welcome Aditi Singhal.
Such great presentations. I'm intimidated, but I'll do it. Hi, everyone. Welcome to my baccalaureate presentation of my senior project. I am Aditi Singhal, and I'm an interdisciplinary studies and sustainable food systems major, and I've put together the knowledge I got from these two disciplines into my senior project. So I want to start by asking you all, give me a show of hands if you've heard this term called the gut feeling. Okay, great, we know that. Well, what if I told you that this gut feeling, or intuition, as sometimes we know it, is not free will, but chiefly regulated by these microscopic bacteria, which are residing inside all over your body. And these bacteria are the sole reason for the state of your mental and physical health. And these bacteria were also the reason of my senior project. So let me take you through what my senior project was. It was a 3-day-long gut health workshop held right here in the Crossroads Center for anyone and everyone in the Prescott who was interested in the topic of gut health. What happened here was that I explored the role of these bacteria in our physical health through two broad lenses: food and movement. From my research, everything that I'd read about this field, the hows and whats of these two aspects of our lives came to be the chief determinants of how our gut health and consequently our overall health prevailed in the world. So in the context of food, while there are various diets and foods out there which nurture our gut, I chose to focus on one particular cuisine, Indian cooking, considering my Indian heritage. We collectively dove deep into the scientific nuances around various foods that's used in Indian cooking, alongside learning the art of cooking Indian food. It's a skill. It's not just following our own recipe. And I took a similar approach when it came to movement. I discovered that there are 1,000+ ways of moving one's body to cater to one's health. But over the years, we have only boiled down to certain kinds of exercises, which we claim to be the most beneficial for our body. I chose dance as an alternate form of moving our body to cater our gut health and show the impact of these alternate movements, which we have traditionally known all along, but never really incorporated it into our daily lives. Once again, here we learned the scientific effects of these low-impact exercises on our body, while also cherishing the art of a culturally different way of moving. Now, you may think, wow, she's got it all. She's planned it out so well, it looks so great. Well, not really. The reality was very different, and a lot of people here know that because they were there on that day. Everything was going fine on day one. I was right here on the podium, giving my speech, telling everyone about the microbiota, and beep, the fire alarm in this Crossroads Center rang, gave the loudest announcement that it was not ready to accept the smoking Indian cooking that I was demonstrating for everyone. It was a havoc. I was scared. Everyone was scared. It was almost half an hour. It was ringing loud. Everyone was trying to just calm this fire alarm down. It was pretty dangerous in some ways, according to the fire alarm. But what happened in this havoc was something I found very profound for me. I found my community come to my rescue. This is where I discovered the power of community. My attendees who were there participating in my workshop helped me move the event to the nearby library and gathered all the materials and all the equipments I'd had. They supported me in continuing the event when I thought it's over. We collectively ate the food we made earlier in the day, laughed at the fire alarm, engaged in more one-on-one discussions around gut health and this new concept, which a lot of folks tend to not know about. And I felt this was so much more impactful because I was truly able to impart my knowledge to people and engage in those nuanced questions, which what maybe if I'm standing in front of a podium like right now might not get addressed. This very community also participated in the day 2 and day 3 of my workshop, where we explored how to freely move our bodies through just basic movement. So, moral of the story, never underestimate the power of community, of collective sharing. Day 3 specifically was a showcase, more of a performance of the art of dancing, belly dancing, where I had collaborated with local Prescott belly dancers over the span of 2 months to share our knowledge around this art form and also develop a choreography to showcase at the Prescott College. Here is a little insight into what this art form looks like in case you haven't seen it before. This particular video is a culmination of a choreography where there's a mix of flamenco and belly dance. So it's not only belly dance. Let's see if this works. Great, it was very short, but you had to be there. It was an hour long. Oops, sorry y'all. I'm gonna try to, okay. I want to tell you a story of how did I come up with my senior project. Sure, you know what it was, but there were a lot of circumstances in my life that led me to believe that I had to do this. So you may know there are so many people out there in the world whose personal struggles drive them to pursue a passion. And I think I'm one of those people too. My own personal struggle of chronic health issues, since as long as I can remember, has affected me in a way that I became my own doctor. No one field of medicine, be it Western or traditional, had helped me deal with my health issues sustainably. So when I became my own doctor, I started on my own journey of detecting all the nuances around these health issues and these different practices that we have in our world. And that's when I understood the importance of gut health. This led me to exploring nutrition and movement in depth. So at present, I've created my own concoction of various foods and different ways of moving, which I know cater to my gut health. and overall health. But what I discovered again was there was a huge lack of awareness around this silent epidemic of gastrointestinal issues in the world. And I wanted to break that. I wanted to make it more normal to talk about poop. Hence, I began the journey by doing the senior project. So now you know why it was important for me. But I'm here to tell you that it's important for you too. As of 2024, through a lot of research spanning over 2 decades, we know that 2 out of every 5 people tend to have something called functional gastrointestinal disorder, or in layman's term, gut health imbalance. So, for instance, if you're 50 people in this room right now, there are at least 20 people who have some or the other gut imbalance happening in their body. That's concerning. I am concerned. We know that the modern healthcare systems only provide short-term solutions and sometimes do more harm than good to our inner microbiota ecosystem. So then we think of the alternate practices that we know of, like Ayurveda or homeopath or naturopath. But what's lacking there too is that these traditional practices have lack of effective solutions to cater to the modern gut health issues. A lot of the issues that we have now didn't exist centuries ago. And so our traditional practices do end up failing to help us achieve effective solutions and deal with our gut health so much better in 21st century. This is where I feel that we need a holistic approach. We need to use the rigor, the precision of the modern scientific research that we already have and incorporate it into traditional sciences, where we have this holistic way of looking at our bodies and use that to develop these new modern solutions to our new modern gut health disorders. So let me take you through a scientific fun fact, in case you didn't know. So I know that whenever I'm saying gut health, I'm assuming that a lot of y'all folks feel like, oh, it's the gut, it's this one organ, the stomach, right here. But it's actually not. It's a 30 feet long passage in your entire body, starting from your mouth, going down your throat, your stomach, your small intestine, your large intestine, and your anus. 30 feet, to put it into perspective, imagine 5-6 feet tall humans standing on top of one another. So that's how long it is just inside your body. You just can't see it. And in this 30 feet long passage is where are these little microscopic bacteria I was talking about in the beginning. There are 100 trillion of them, at least, by how much we know right now. 100 trillion is 10 times the human global population on Earth. That's a lot, more than us. And these bacteria are ruling everything. They're ruling the state of your sleep, your mental health, your immunity, the way your heart functions, your ability to retain information or show empathy or sympathy. Everything these tiny little creatures are making sure they're participating inside your body. So it's pretty important to know, address, and acknowledge and understand. Till now, the research into gut health is very new. As I said, it's just 2 decades old. That's just 20 years, and I'm 22. So it's pretty young. But the precision, as I said, the precision and rigor of the scientific knowledge that we have now is so great, the technological advancement is so great that we can physically map out each of these bacteria in our body and understand their role of how they influence our sleep or our immunity. So I took forward my research into all the scientific jargon that I read and created a little more practical solution. This is a vegetarian's guide to food at Prescott College Kino Bay Center in Sonora, Mexico. It's a cool research center if you don't know about it. I created this guide as something stemming from my own struggle, but also as a way for anyone and everyone who want to be at the center and not struggle with their prevailing gut health issues or overall health issues. It is hard to be a vegetarian or a vegan in a country like Mexico, but I'm hoping that this guide helps anyone who would want to visit there and stay healthy. I want to take this time to acknowledge hundreds of people who have helped me along this way. First and foremost, I want to thank my mother, who's been there since day one and has understood my entire journey till here. The support of all the faculty and staff who were there since the beginning of my understanding that I want to do the senior project and led to its execution and dealing with the fire alarm and so on. My professor, Tanjim Azad from my previous university, who truly taught me how to think critically and question every knowledge that I have in front of me. All my friends who were there, who were helping me create the senior project and bring it to reality. Me being new to this entire region of Prescott and Prescott College was really helpful, having the support system right beside me. All the beautiful photos captured by Jamie Frith, my friend, and the fellow belly dancers that I've collaborated with all this while, Lisa, Mary, and Carolina. And of course, not but not the least, the lovely people I've met through this journey of gut health till now. Thank you. Now, I would like to invite the lovely Ann Klink to present her senior project.
Wow, thank you, Aditi. That was so wonderful. All right, everyone. Hi. My name is Ann Klink, and I am a senior in the Sustainable Food Systems program, and I just graduated in 2023, and I am here because I would like to take you guys on a journey of my senior project. After what ended up being a year and a half of planning and organizing, I am so proud to show you the development of an ongoing Prescott College student community garden. As a sophomore in college, I discovered a student housing property with a small front yard made up of 2 identical-sized square plots with a walkway running through to the home. What appeared to be mysterious and neglected at the time, this front yard was buried deep with grasses and overgrown flora. On the edges of the pathway stood these timeless grapevines growing from one end of the wall to the other. And during mid-September, I discovered the miracle of these treasured vines. From dark red to purple to champagne, a diverse variety of grapes were established here. Someone once took great care of this space, I thought. And as it stood today unkempt, the growth continued. Maybe it was my love for fruit or a gluttonous desire just for more, but finding the gift of these grapes is what pushed me towards what happened next. And this is how it all began. So, you might wonder, why a community garden? A community garden is a place of growth. It's a safe space meant for the cultivation of the mind's eye. It's a place of authenticity where organically grown plants are grown in close proximity, coexisting with mutual beneficial relationships. This world has transformed housing to fit industrialized models, lacking green space for people to explore their own right to fresh food. If one is raised surrounded by no education or accessible landscape to hold their own rightful ownership, there is a really hard time to make connection to plants. And this is a concern that I continue to see, which has motivated me to do this project. So I had a lot of anxiety around completing a senior project. It was probably the biggest looming thing as a freshman. So I started as early as I could. And this ended up being a blessing in disguise because I had no idea about the ride I was in for to make this whole thing happen. I saw this space as an opportunity for reinvention, and I wanted to clean up one side of the yard and make it a garden and refurbish the other for a sitting space. This was a very vague and ambitious idea. The fencing was outdated, and there were thick layers of brush that filmed the entire yard. So with what little plans I had in mind, I started with some self-directed steps. My first task was to find the department responsible for the space and request access to work here. After consulting with Jules about my plan, who was the former housing director at the time, I had gained support and granted permission to start working physically on the space. I started clearing out all the extras, pulled up what felt like a million weeds, And as I hacked away at the ground, I realized that this was something that I simply could not do alone. But I wasn't meant to do it alone. And that's when I realized that if this is going to be an important space to the college community, I need to be involving other students. Eleanor Tyson, my esteemed professor, my mentor, has always been a supporter of my project, and she has helped me transform my ideas into even bigger and better ones. Implementing community involvement in this project was critical in her eyes, as her experience has taught her that the lasting flame of a senior project is reliant on the kindling of those who feed its legacy. So I reconstructed my plans about what was a simple, personal garden into what could be a collective garden with several caretakers stewarding the space. I spent time measuring, researching, branding, conceptualizing, and budgeting potential layouts for the space. And the infrastructure of this project was truly brought to life through the allocation of funds from the Sustainability Council in December 2022. Tyson introduced me to this resource and showed me how I could apply for funding through involving Prescott faculty and student sustainability representatives. So after meeting with the council and explaining the community garden concept to them, there was a lot of encouragement and support for the initiative. So come spring 2023, the garden materials needed for the fencing and for the raised beds could be purchased, and all of the on-ground process could start then. So as official budget and space approval was granted, it was time to involve the student body about the layout. So during the winter of 2022 and 2023, I would walk around campus with this big model vision board of sized cutouts for students to rearrange little bed plots. And I would explain to students the goal of creating a community garden space and ask for design input. And it was actually pretty successful. I got a couple students to show me a lot of their ideas, the beautiful Haley. And it was at this time that the garden space had coined the name Choya Community Garden, as it was the front yard space of a pre-existing Prescott College student housing, Choya Community Student Housing. This design was picked out with the help of the students and put into a digital map. That got a little messy, so that made a lot more sense. So during the winter time, there was some brush clearing, trimming, and taking down of the old fence, but for the most part, the garden was left to sit during that first winter. And as spring came around in 2023, it was time to revisit the garden space in preparation for renovation. Fencing and raised bed materials were brought, and I, along with some of my family, my friends, and many Green Mountain Sustainability Work Study crew friends all helped me with tediously measuring, lifting, pounding, and placing the skeletal design elements of this garden together. We wheelbarrowed lots and lots of compost and loads of dirt from one side of the garden to the other, filling the beds with a rich base of growing medium. And this task was like assembling a puzzle, and once the skeletal bones fit in, it was time to start growing the organs of community. The first growing season was supported by myself and my student colleagues at the time. The goal was to prepare this garden for a harvestable fall semester through a display of the ecologically productive space, and really just see how this first bed season worked out, because we weren't even sure. The work was very exhausting, especially with the small team, but the results were extremely empowering and impressive. We did encounter some pests. So lessons of pest management were well learned in the first season, as deer would hop the fence and raid all the tender bits, and gophers and moles would get through the bottom. So one of the biggest mistakes that I made was not putting gopher wire into the beds initially. And that was a big lesson learned for this upcoming season. But even so, with organic and preventative practices, many of the plants survived all of the damage. And within a month, life exploded, and seeds were turning into healthy young plants. August 2023 rolled around, and students were back on campus. The garden was bursting with successful growth. I was proud to hear neighbors and community members compliment the progress they had seen. With life in full swing, there was a window of opportunity to showcase the finished garden space to the students. I wanted to explain the process that had already been done, as well as the future relationships that students could have with the space. Just before the main harvest season of the garden, it was important to recruit interested students to help me construct the social structure of the upcoming growing season. In September, I hosted a learn-in where students came in to understand what involvement could look like and learning in this space through discussion and painting. During the event, we painted an official sign for the garden to display. The space is wedged in between a residential neighborhood, which meant the signage was quite necessary. And this is all of us at the event. It was really great. Next step was establishing the community garden structure. So I had done a teach-in with a food systems class where students brainstormed ideas and ways to allocate the community garden space. One student recommended that instead of establishing a permanent allocation system, it should be up to the season's garden team to give individual allocation and withhold communication amongst themselves. So this way, those that are part of the garden season will have communication and shared responsibilities, and it can change. So this idea ended up being the current model of the gardens organization that is still used today. And as it stands today, students have established a totally self-directed garden from fall to winter and what is now coming up for the spring and summer season. And it is amazing to discover the capabilities of this climate, especially, as all throughout the winter, the garden did manage to maintain a lot of growth. A lot of people did some garlic, kale, radishes, parsnips, you name it. I was surprised. From what started as a fascination with just yummy grapes had developed into a process of months of designing and preparation, and has now blossomed into an active community garden space. And I'm so proud to have seen this project come so far, and I am dedicated to follow its development in the future. And as I move forward with my career, I'm inspired by the ground-up capabilities of community gardens and local food movements. I want to be part of inspiring and empowering other people in the community to also benefit from working with the land. The reward from community gardening is so much more than having fresh food, but it is a way to transcend connection to the land and strengthen a community of self-reliance. And I have found so much personal fulfillment and professional inspiration from the connections I have made to the people, the plants, and to this place. I want to thank everyone who made this whole project possible, and I'm looking forward to what it's going to be in the future. Thank you so much. And next up, we have an online student, Kai Daniels, presenting their baccalaureate about Masilo.
Hello everyone, my name is Kai Daniel, and I'm graduating with a Master's in Environmental Studies. This presentation is on the work I completed for my senior project for my undergrad, which was finalized in August of 2023. In the summer of 2023, I went on a practicum course, Prescott College's Dupoy Field Station in Maasai Land, Kenya, to pursue my interest in GIS and map making for a senior project. The project goal was to create maps using GIS that help tell the story of seizure and exploitation of Maasai lands and natural resources over time. The Dupoy Center is a collaboration between the Maasai people and Prescott College. The Maasai are a pastoral people with deep ties to land. Their economy, culture, and indigenous education system all rely on easy access to land. Their way of life values living with and around wildlife on a practical and spiritual level. And perhaps because of this, many places in Maasai land have high biodiversity and high conservation value. The colonial history of the Maasai played out very similarly to other indigenous communities around the world. massacres, strategic use of diseases, divide and conquer, forced migration, and reservations. When Kenya gained independence from the British, some of the same extractive tactics were used by the new Kenyan elite against the Maasai to enrich themselves. While there is no traditional word for map in the Maasai language, maps have been used against them throughout their history, starting at the beginning with the partition of Africa, which you can see on this slide here, which split Maasai land between British Kenya and German Tanzania. In this context, we can see that there are many untold spatial stories in the Maasai community. On this slide, we can see the story of colonization from a Maasai perspective in these hand-drawn maps that I encountered when arriving at Dupuy. They were drawn by Prescott College students and community members in 2013. Beautifully drawn and labeled with Maasai place names, these maps tell an important story. My favorite element of these maps is the shading of green to red, representing wetland to dry land, which helps us explore how colonial reservation boundaries interact with local microclimates. After seeing them, I began to believe that the spatial story they tell could be complemented by the accuracy and precision of a GIS-rendered map of land loss. I'll focus on 3 maps that I created in Quantum GIS, each with a distinct story behind it. This first map is an estimate based on the guidance of Maasai leaders, historical sources, of the territory of Maasai before colonization. This is an important spatial story because most of the maps of the Maasai on the internet depict only the colonial reservations that they were forced into, or the counties of modern Kenya and Tanzania that they now reside in. Nairobi is on this map not just because it is the capital of Kenya and the nation's largest city, but also because Nairobi is actually a Maasai word meaning place of cool waters, and was an important place of healing and medicine before it became a British colony town. On this map, we can see an important trend. The green and wet places of Maasai land in and around Nairobi were taken by the British, and at this point have been extensively developed. The drier land of Samburu, Kajiado, and Narok are what remained Maasai. This next map continues that story and expands on how conservation efforts like the creation of national parks, forests, and reserves, as well as the creation of conservancies, have conflicted with indigenous land rights. While conserving land is usually seen as universally good, it can block access to land that Maasai care deeply for, have been caretakers of, and depend upon. This project took me on a deep dive into fortress conservation and the damage it has done to indigenous communities not just in Kenya, but across the world. Fortress conservation is the idea that the only way to protect nature is to remove humans from it through the creation of carefully regulated parks that are empowered by law enforcement. Fortress conservation assumes that local people will always misuse resources and degrade ecosystem functions. This idea, first invented in the US in the 19th century, was brought to Kenya by British colonials. At Dupuy, I heard about Maasai who had agreed to put their land in a conservancy, only to end up illegally imprisoned for quote-unquote trespassing on it, or were beaten by the police, or worse. Or conservancies that, being ran by foreigners, disregarded traditional ways of doing things. While everyone I met there cared deeply about protecting nature, there was also the understanding that conservation, often driven by international money, can be a tool of oppression. All of these maps were responses to specific desires or needs I heard from folks at Dupuy. This one is focused on the local area around the center, which is in blue in the center of the map. Each of the red dots represents a tourist lodge. As far as anyone at Dupuy could tell, All of these lodges are owned by non-Maasai people, despite often using extensive Maasai artwork and even dressing their employees as Maasai people. Part of the mission of the field station is to reclaim some of the economic power that is produced on Maasai land and reclaim it for the Maasai people. And this map helps make the point that tourism in its current state is an extractive industry in Maasai land and implicitly calls for the wealth this land generates to flow to the caretakers and inhabitants of the land. The map also calls attention to the fact that while this land is thought to be a pristine wilderness, and in some ways still is, it is heavily utilized by tourism. Searching through publicly accessible location data, I found 338 lodges in and around the Mara. They're shown on the left here. Adding a river layer to this map, we can see that the lodges dominate the banks of the rivers in and around the reserve. This makes sense. Tourists want to rest alongside the banks of the Mara and Talak rivers, with hippos lounging in the water below and monkeys swinging in the trees above. But it is a continuation of the troubling trend of Maasai being pushed to the driest parts of the landscape, while the wetter areas are reserved for elites and international visitors. Using quantum GIS, I was able to quantify some of the land in these maps, and the result is on this table. I'd just like to highlight that, based on this estimate, traditional Maasai land was larger than the landmass of the United Kingdom, and that Kenyan Maasai land is about 3 times smaller than it once was. So what's the result of this work? The goal was to help tell the story of land and resource seizure and exploitation. The field station has used these maps in presentations and trainings on these topics, so I feel like that goal has been accomplished. This work has also led to a continuing relationship with the DuPuy Center. I'll be returning this summer to facilitate a mapping and Maasai land training, to share GIS knowledge and promote creation of similar mapping projects among the Maasai at the field station. Through this project, I've also grown in my understanding of the importance of diverse perspectives in mapping. No map tells the whole story of a place. However, spreading knowledge of mapmaking and GIS to all stakeholders can help us edge closer to a true representation of land. Ashe Lang, which means thank you in Ma, thank you for listening. And I just want to thank everyone at DuPuy, Professor Gelstra, and Prescott College for making this all possible. I've included my email. Reach out if you have any questions or comments. All right. Bye.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Xavier Yando, and my project here is all about the sharks of the Gulf of California. Sharks are beautiful, fascinating creatures. The vitality they bring to the underwater environments they exist within is great, and their necessity within marine and certain freshwater ecosystems is absolute. Almost all sharks are considered keystone predators, their presence necessary to keep prey populations low to maintain ecological balance. They take a long time to reach sexual maturity, and so have been very vulnerable to overfishing. Despite their beauty and ecological importance, shark populations around the globe have been in decline for many years, with species targeted both legally and illegally for their fins and their livers, or caught en masse as accidental catch in trawl nets and on long lines. Things in the Gulf of California are no different. The goal of my project was to create a host of educational resources for the Prescott College Keno Bay Center and local communities, all of which will be covered in this presentation. I am an environmental studies major with an emphasis in marine biology and ecology, and I've been pursuing this field since I was around 6 years old. I've always had an interest in sharks, but it wasn't until around 3 years ago that I really started to fixate on them. It started with a small research project about shark liver fisheries off the coast of Western Africa in a class of Mariana Altreichers. And soon, And soon after, as I began to more frequently head down to the Quino Bay Center, a research and social justice center located in Valle de Quino, Sonora, Mexico, to further pursue my marine studies, my curiosity and thirst for knowledge concerning these great predators became insatiable. Now, this project came about after lots of consultations with Lorraine Meltzer, the center's director. I had a few different project ideas fall through, and I got a bit stuck on what to do, but after talking with her, I quickly realized that the Quino Bay Center, the place where I had spent the vast majority of my undergraduate career, was missing something. See, I've dunked my hands into a lot of subjects there. Marine biodiversity, island biogeography, oceanography, seabirds, indigenous rights, indigenous ecological knowledge, social justice, and yet I'd never once heard anything on sharks, at least not extensively. How was it that this center, so heavily focused on animal studies, community learning, and indigenous empowerment, had almost nothing on sharks or the shark fishing industry? The very town of Valle de Quino was founded on shark fishing. I had to change something. As I stated previously, the goal of my project was to create educational resources for the Quino Bay Center and the surrounding communities. Knowledge was the base of the project. Before I did anything else, I needed to talk to people, to gather sources, to conduct interviews with indigenous Comcaac people and with local fishers, all of whom have vast and varying knowledge about the Gulf and its history. My local mentor for the project was Ulises Becerra, a longtime fisher and current Quino Bay staff member who helped me connect with local knowledge. With his help, I made an educational presentation, compiled a source list, made a poster, and then made an attempt at a guidebook. One of the very first things I did was gather information on the history of the shark fishery in both Quino Bay and the Gulf of California as a whole. I created a 35-slide presentation based upon interviews with local fishers who lived through the histories. The presentation, supported by Western academia, explores Western shark fishing history in the Gulf from the early 1800s all the way up to the present day, covering eras such as the pearl fisheries, when sharks were seen as monsters, the liver oil rush, in which sharks started to be commodified, the march to the sea, in which sharks were hunted en masse, and the modern era. Settler perceptions of sharks shifted pretty quickly from monster to global resource, which is where things stand today. Excuse me. Now, onto the fun part, the nitty-gritty. This list here, likely a bit too small to see, contains over 100 different sources on shark fishing history, shark biology, ecology, documentation, settler colonialism, law and policy, and et cetera, and et cetera. It has various notes from my interviews with fishers and Comcaac peoples, critiques of laws, tracking of where and when I found certain things. It has everything. It's my master list of everything. What I have here are only 3 of the 9 pages I worked many months to create. All of them contributed directly to both the history portion of this project and this, a list of all 62 shark species I found to be in the Gulf, their various protections, their levels of endangerment, their names in various languages, and if the Western-style research I combed through had backing by local fishers, Comcaac people, or both. This database and its various notes, coupled with my master list of sources, formed the base for this project, the legs on which the table could stand. They are what allowed me to start on my project's products and what allows me to critique them. I poured my heart and soul into these little documents, and the utility they can provide to future student, researcher, and community projects will be immense. But in terms of my final products, these are only the base, the legs, not the tabletop. My second big product after the history presentation was this, Sharks of the Gulf of California, an informative poster giving the spark notes of everything I researched. It has topics ranging from shark fishing history to biological knowledge to the failures of modern conservation methods. It is the Quino Bay Center's first poster on sharks and will now be available for public viewing and teaching. Easily digestible, brightly colored, and simple to see and read through, it creates a quick knowledge base for any students or community members interested in the sharks of the Gulf. I'd love to go over it in more detail, but for the sake of time, I can only give you this little preview. I'm willing to answer any questions you have about it after the show. This was the most fruitful of my products, but I do have one more. I created a booklet, a guide of sorts, detailing every single shark on my Excel sheet, their descriptions, biology, reproduction habits, and protections. If any have or had particular relevance to the shark fishing industry or the Comcock or local communities, that information was added. It's about halfway finished, with many notes scattered across it with information on stories, history, cultural significance, and anything else important. Having something this large and detailed come into the Kino Bay Center, where there was previously very little, would be a significant addition. Its very purpose to help surrounding communities and future classes learn about a topic so important yet discussed so very rarely. It's not done, but it still could be. The information is there, the templates are done, and there are examples of how things should be laid out. All it needs is for someone to take it on and finish it. This project now lives with the Kino Bay Center as an ongoing project, ready and waiting to be finished by the next group of students passionate about sharks. And that's it. That was my project. A little bit more. I'm going straight to grad school after this, somewhere out of state. I've got projects planned out for it, research I can do, maybe even a book to write. But no matter where I go, this project will always be special to me. Kino will definitely always be special to me. And hey, if anyone out here comes down to Kino, or those keen on my clothing choice and my poster, the Dupoi Center in Kenya, maybe I'll be there. I'll be around. Oh, and this little guy, he's just chewing on some fish guts. Don't worry about him. Thank you very much. And now, for our final presentation of the afternoon, I would like to present the amazing Emma Tom.
Hi everyone, I'm going to take a deep breath. You're welcome to join me. I love it. Thank you all for sitting here and sticking with us. It means a lot for the hours that we've put into these projects, and it means a lot to us. So my name is Emma Tom, and I'm finishing up my 4th year at Prescott College. My senior project is a film called Empathy Diaries that merges my 2 competencies, arts and humanities, and psychology and human development. The driving question for this film is, what is empathy? And I ask this question because, frankly, I just feel really passionate about breaking down the walls we put up between each other as humans, seeing what's underneath when we get vulnerable. So I conducted interviews for this project, about 10 of them, with people from all over the world, ranging from Colombia to Sweden, Mexico, Argentina, United States, because I wanted to better understand a global context of empathy. So I want to give a little content warning for this film because it touches on the topics of suicide and death. This is a safe space if you need to leave or express yourself however you need to. And without further ado, here's Empathy Diaries.
Empathy.
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 Empathy is
being able to share any emotion with another person.
being aware of more than your own bubble.
To really feel how that person feels.
Our ability to connect with people in a way that is meaningful. You know, it really feels like this opening, you know, like you see in fast motion photography, you know, when a plant opens up, you know, it's just like, you know, it takes a while for it to happen, but when it's open, it's just like,
So psychology is starting to separate these 2 facets of empathy, one being emotional empathy. So that's like you fall down and I see it and I immediately wince because I'm having this experience with you. Kind of emotional, maybe even physical, right? It's the mirror neurons. It's the like a mental experience is going on in my brain that would be similar as if I were actually having the experience. But cognitive empathy is just the ability to understand that someone is suffering and maybe understand why. Like, oh, I see that you're suffering. I know what suffering is. I also suffer. You know, that expression that I see on your face is something that I understand. I know what that feeling is, and I can sort of understand maybe why you're going through this.
This is fucked up. I feel like I'm gonna cry. My brother and I were very close. When I was coming here, we were talking once again about like the paths that we have been taking, and he was just sad about the fact that I was leaving, but he still said he was happy for me. And he just wiped a tear, like one single tear from his cheeks, and he just kept playing on the computer. And that was it. Like that, I feel like that was really meaningful. The fact that he was not jealous or angry at me. He was just taking it as it was.
My mom considered committing suicide when she was in her late 20s. There were 3 of us, and she was going to drive us off a bridge because she didn't want to leave orphans. And she told me about that. She said, I realized it was the wrong thing to do, and so I started to look for help. We're not supposed to solve all these problems on our own. And one of who was my best friend growing up, and we met in 4th grade, her family was my other family. And her mother was, every time you walked in the house, it smelled like bread. And she was always welcoming and loving. And now I'm still in high school, can't go back home. Now what am I gonna do? Don't have a job. So I went and talked to Mrs. Rayland and said, I'm kind of stuck. Is there any way that you can help me until I can get another job and find another place to live? And so I finished high school at Mrs. Freeland's house. And when I apologized to her for not having money to pay for my stay and my food, she said, we don't expect you to repay us. We expect that you will take what we helped you with and do it for somebody else someday, and that's how we get repaid.
I think part of teaching empathy and teaching compassion starts with understanding it in ourselves. What do we feel? And how to sit with our own feelings and discomforts helps us be able to tolerate someone else's.
So, as you know, my son died in a car accident. And there was this guy named Ben. He used to live in Prescott. And I mean, we weren't really close, but we knew each other, you know. And they got to know him. I'm not sure when it was. It had been a couple weeks after my son had passed. And I get this. It was a recording of Ben. And he's traveling down a road. He's in his car, and you can see passing traffic and trees.
he wasn't saying anything. He was just crying uncontrollably as he's looking into the camera, into his phone. I felt like he was expressing my feelings of having lost a son, knowing that he has a son, and that he let himself feel what it was like. Nothing more profoundly impacted me than that. And I think that took incredible courage on his part to let himself feel that. And so in some ways, deep, deep empathy really requires a form of courage.
I think as we talk about it, the more I feel like empathy is everywhere, not like all the time.
I want to encourage people or invite people to experience with just like opening your hearts to other people, and it takes courage, but like experiment with opening your heart, experiment with doing something kind for someone and see how it feels. Because I do think it has really revolutionary power.
Thank you, everyone. I also want to give a special thank you to Carl Schweitz, my family who's here today, and my entire Prescott family. I couldn't have done it without you. Thank you so much. That's it. Thank you for being here. Round of applause for all the graduates.